Hello, my name is Michael O'Keefe, aka the Movie Mystic. If you enjoy these film reviews, then please press the like button, subscribe, hit the bell, and stay in the know. Subscribing to this channel means you get to watch the coolest new film industry interviews, hear some groovy film reviews, and get some live streams too. Number 35. This movie certainly has some classic 70s horror references going on, from David Cronenberg's Shivers to George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead, with a bit of a John Carpenter vibe as well. And it's from Turkey. The strongest point is the trippy production design for this film. There's some visual setups that make you truly catch a vibe, and it is where the most work went into making this film. The Antenna is a spooky media critique which brings into attention conformist mindsets and the reasons why they kick in, but perhaps that latter part is unanswerable in a twist that is great to explore with horrific ambiance. The 70s and 80s saw plenty of politically based horror movies, and it is the setting of a building that is reminiscent of the Montreal set Shivers, and replaced consumer with media zombie, and you've got a bit of a connection with Dawn of the Dead. It's an interesting debut, and while the production design is all there, perhaps a more tightly moving script with a bit more emotional depth will be seen in director Orson Barham's follow-up film. Number 34. The latest film from Adam McGowan might be typical fare for him, but it will also most certainly be challenging fare for most audience members, as it is non-chronological to show the non-reliability of memory. It is an interesting approach to storytelling for sure, and with Luke Wilson in it, there is a certain amount of prestige for a Canadian production that such few are able to get, but Mr. McGowan's track record speaks for itself. He probably is the most prestigious director in Canada at the moment, and he is to be saluted for his track record and ability to still get productions made that get seen and respected abroad. The whole teacher-student relationship mystery and the trauma that spreads from it is hardcore stuff, but Adam McGowan is serious enough of a human being to take on such subject matter, which is unsettling but alive. There's no gross-out stuff, it's very emotional. While a little hard to keep track of everything with the non-chronological storytelling, it comes together in the end and eventually becomes a positive sort of story. Number 33. This 1960s Hong Kong set animation is dreamy and intriguing, while also a little stiff and something to put on to put yourself to sleep. But in the end, it is like the animated adaptation of In the Mood for Love. Which other movie can say it is that? A lot of scenes in the film are dream sequences or memories, so the animated format is put to good use by being expressive and strange, making this film from the visual element to be pretty good actually. The lust for the past is a bit too much though, and the script diverts to dream scenes too often to ever get a clear story with narrative thrust. But even if that wasn't the goal, there is slowness and stiffness in the animation as well. While number 7 Cherry Lane looks cool, if the goal was to be more ambient and vibe-centric, they could have had things move a little bit faster with some kinetic energy rather than being still and strange in an indulgent move. It's rather unfortunate because the subject matter is interesting, and it did have the potential to be much more interesting than the end results, but it must be stated that the design of the animation is strong. Number 32. True History of the Kelly Gang was the only movie that, because of the sheer exhaustion of TIFF activity, I temporarily passed out for anywhere from 20 to 45 minutes, which could be a fun experience in a sense. How so? You could be awoken by something outrageous or just be amusingly confused. In this case, I felt I didn't miss too much, but it must be stated that this happened. The story tells one of a real-life 19th century Australian gang who were quite gruesome, and when things come to a deadly judicial rap for them, the elite seem thrilled, while missing the point that they were a symptom of a system. Being born in poverty typically leads to doom because of the lack of social mobility in a hierarchical way of life. But this movie is not an apologist film, it is more just a gritty, realistic slice of life for a group of unfortunates. The highlight has to be the gangster mentor Russell Crowe, who has a few scenes early on in the movie, only not to return, which makes him sorely missed, but hey, at least they got Russell Crowe to show for a period of time. The film doesn't really distinguish itself among other gangster movies, or even period gangster movies, it just tells the story, then it's over. It would have been nice if they really had more of an angle. Number 31. Motherless Brooklyn was a passion project for Edward Norton. It is pretty far-fetched, but also perfectly fine studio fare that if you don't mind believing for a couple of hours that someone on the outside with mental disabilities can truly mess with the powers that be, then go for it. The plausibility is a bit of an issue with the film, but as a product, it is slick, sexy, and fun with a cast ranging from Bruce Willis to Michael K. Williams, to a lot of people who clearly wanted to work with notoriously difficult Edward Norton. Some outlets reran horror stories of perfectionism and battling that Edward Norton is notorious for. However, this film is rather safe, not the gritty, fatalistic image you may have in your head with a film called Motherless Brooklyn. The script faces itself as a modern Chinatown, with an elaborate scheme of the city's power, all under the thumb of a few people, and it is Bruce Willis who introduces us to this dilemma in the first scene. He also dies in the first scene, and his whole operation is inherited by the lovable Edward Norton, who notably has a mean case of Tourette's syndrome, adding a charming obsessive quality to his character, but also makes things kind of far-fetched, as mentioned. That being said, it is a fun movie, and the jazz score rocks. Number 30. Gene Seberg's relationship with the Black Panthers is the subject of this lovely biopic, with the utterly bold decisions as to what roles to take actress by the name of Kristen Stewart. Kristen Stewart must be saluted for taking chances with roles in this free-spirited manner, from Personal Shopper, Cafe Society, Jeremiah Terminator Leroy, and now Seberg. She has decided to mainly stick to these more intimate movies, which stimulate the mind. Jean Seberg was famous in France for starring alongside Jean-Paul Belmondo, Jean-Luc Godard's 1960 masterpiece Breathless. But this film looks at her down the line in 1968 to 1971, when the FBI started spying on her for dating Hakeem Jamal, a Black Panther played by Anthony Mackie. We've also got an FBI goon played by Vince Vaughn, aka Double V, and upcoming sensation Margaret Qualley from A Once Upon a Time in Hollywood fame, played Double V's partner's wife. This stellar cast captivate the first part of the film by looking at how the FBI inappropriately ruined Jean Seberg's life in the film by spying on her pretty ruthlessly and finding ways to discredit her, mainly through going to gossip columns about her affair with Hakeem. The movie loses some steam halfway through, the novelty wears out, and the whole issue of marriages being ruined and Jean feeling uncomfortable zaps dramatic tension from a purposeful plot, but there's enough glitz and substance in this movie in the first half to consider checking it out. Number 29. Jamil Q.T. Kubeka returns to TIFF for the movie for the third time this year. He comes to teed out with Knuckle City, a film made in South Africa to tell the story about two brothers, an aging boxer and an ancient criminal, making for not the best odds in a fierce environment. There's a wide cast of characters as well, from lovers to family members to gangsters, and it is a great way to get the pulse of life in South Africa, which for non-Africans will always have a sociological aspect to it. It is great to learn about life in that environment, especially now that South Africa is well over its honeymoon period of apartheid being over, and this story is a compelling vehicle to see what life is currently like. Not that it is a political film focused on that at all. It is much more a dramatic gangster film, which looks at the extra bit of energy we have to bring out of ourselves to make it in this world. It's the universality of that instead of the specificity of South Africa that will connect with audience members. So if you like heavy-duty movies, then this should appeal to you. Number 28. Eating disorders and mental illness in general can be explored well in a short, with a weird over-the-top concept, with a bit of storytelling pushing forward, and that is what you get with It's Nothing. A young woman is not eating like she should, and in every social interaction she has where it is brought up, the eating disorder manifested in the shape of another young woman intervenes and asserts forceful irrationality. This works in a few scenarios, and then there is solid storytelling going forward, so it is a good message-laden piece of work that is most appropriately put in the short film format. Number 27. Let's talk about the personal history of David Copperfield. Director of The Death of Stalin, Armando Iannucci, returned to TIFF with this movie, and expectations for this critic were quite high, since The Death of Stalin is incredibly fun in its dark way. The film doesn't deliver the same punch as that film. It does take place in the world of Charles Dickens, and has the same sort of beat historical feel of The Death of Stalin, in that non-whites are cast in what was a strictly white world, and speak in a somewhat different diction than of this time. They do speak with British accents, though, but act goofy in a more modern than period way. But this whole movie is based on memoirs that lack focus or a general ambiance that holds through the duration of the film. There are cool performances by Gwendolyn Christie and Tilda Swinton, but this is not a standout film at the festival, with a lot of buzz following the screening, sadly. But, oh well, you can't nail it every time. This movie should hopefully make Armando Iannucci rethink some things for his next projects, trying to find a balance between the grit of his last projects and the perhaps pander-soft quality of this project. Number 26. The Danish movie Resin is truly strange and beautiful, even at times in its look at a family who live in the woods isolated from society in a romanticized vision of connection to the earth in their perceived sense. In a more objective perception, they're being reclusive, and certainly the parents can be labeled as insensitive to their kids' need to be part of a community of other kids to learn how to fit into society. Society might be a construct, but being in nature all the time is not going to connect you to what's real. It'll only cut you off from it. The film descends into some violence that is more emotional than stylized. The stylization of shots play out more with nature themes and some of the revolting stuff to be found in nature. It is a strong film that makes a creepy impression and reminds us that despite the artifice of modern life, it is what connects us, and it is better to just go along with that element of society rather than cut ourselves off from everything altogether, because in the end, what can that really accomplish? Number 25. The movie Wet Season looks at the taboo subject matter of student/teacher love affairs. How scandalous. It's still psychologically mystifying subject matter, but absolutely the extreme, strong stuff that is worth exploring in a 100-minute narrative film. It is not pro-student/teacher love affair, but it does show it like a documentary without being judgmental, which is certainly helpful for us to understand and process how these relationships develop and exist. Sometimes it is a bit stiff, but it is a rare movie which becomes more interesting over time rather than have its entertainment factor wear off halfway through the movie. Since this kind of relationship is something most of us have no knowledge of, it is hard to know whether they got it right, and also feels hard to feel good or bad about them. But it is that disconnect that distinguishes it from other romantic films. This is worth keeping an eye out for. Number 24. The Iranian hostage crisis from 1979 is the focus of this documentary, which shows the tragic American-Iranian relationship from the perspective of 1979 and with the knowledge known now 40 years later. It was a big news item in its day and sent the Carter presidency, but also today it is important to see the rise of the Ayatollah system of government in Iran, which fractiously remains to this day, making this history lesson even more important. You'll learn about the Shah's coup in the 1950s to the 1979 Islamic Revolution, which shut down the embassy, and then the failed Desert One mission, which was a top-secret mission to rescue the Americans in Iran. Many interesting perspectives on all of this are heard in the documentary by people who had a stake in this operation, and sorry whether they were military or had family kidnapped, even Jimmy Carter is in the documentary. This is a definitive take on the story, and it will remain as a document on the issue to be referred back to generations to come, which is a rather solid accomplishment for any documentary. Number 23. The County is a comedic drama looking at a co-op operation in Iceland through the perspective of a female farmer named Inga who takes business into her own hands in a Frances McDormand in 3 billboards outside Ebbing, Missouri fashion. It is important to keep in mind smaller scale corruption and how, although it affects fewer lives, their perspectives are absolutely worth following. The comedic tone is dry and deadpan, making it the opposite of that frat boy style comedy. But there is one memorable set piece when Inga gets a little out of hand, but in a cinematic, cathartic way that is harder to condemn. The opening scene is quite memorably graphic as well. It is a cow being born, which is hard to get out of your mind, and that will certainly remain in your mind, as well as the righteousness depicted. The cost one must pay from righteousness is inevitable, and individuals can only accomplish so much in life. However, the pursuit of justice as well, making the world a better place, is an honorable. Number 22. Designer drugs and time travel merge in Synchronic. The ladies from Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead, the team behind The Endless, who have established a good lane where they have trippy visuals and a coherent narrative. It's a smart move, because they can't be accused of not being weird, neither can they be accused of not making sense. It's all there despite some convoluted science. The storylines are always perfectly clear. This movie even has Anthony Mackie in it, solidifying their style with mainstream credibility, which is fantastic to see that the Falcon has excellent taste, and beyond that, has a very strong performance in this movie. The idea stems from time travel for a black man, and what that would mean if he went back to the southern U.S., back in even more racist times, but it's through this weird designer drug in a Phil K. Dick-esque move. The science may be mumbo-jumbo, but the visuals are strong, and the life and death state are there, making this trip fest something with more mass appeal, which is a good thing. Number 21. The Fast of Nine is an economical trip fest that looks at an alien invasion in a sleepy Midwest town back in the 1950s, one night in a film that doesn't have very many special effects, but keeps you drawn in with intrigue. A couple of young people run in a radio station, find a strange frequency, then speak over the phone, and then in person with two old-timers who speak with conviction that aliens are real and are trying to make contact with this town on this night. These exchanges, especially the first one, are very well written because you simply cannot cut yourself off from what is being said, in an interesting economical twist where we want to see the aliens more as time goes on, but ultimately it is the tease that is so satisfying. When the effect comes in, it's cool, but everything that came before is cooler, which tricks you into thinking that they wish they didn't have such a small budget like true magicians. The film isn't always amazingly interesting, but when it is engaging, it is very much so, and I certainly hope that it does come to the Ottawa market, because it is a gateway to everything else weird. Number 20. Ordinary Love was the dottiest movie that I saw at TIFF 2019, but that's actually alright, given that this is an Irish story starring Liam Neeson and Leslie Manfield, two excellent actors who just don't have enough to do in this movie. Leslie Manfield's character gets diagnosed with breast cancer, and the old Irish couple don't know what to do with themselves other than bicker, go to appointments, and wait for enough time to film a movie. It's a movie that is difficult to actively watch, but also it is a pleasant time killer, or at least for older demographic than this 34-year-old. While life was on the line, there didn't feel like enough conflict for a film. Liam Neeson is much more action movie centered these days, so perhaps we are lucky to see him do a drama, but perhaps his dramatic chops have sagged a bit, certainly next to Leslie Manfield's. They have especially since Phantom Thread. This is a movie that is hard to love, but it's hard to dislike too much either, given the caliber of star power. But it is perhaps a preferred movie if you've been married forever. This will then most likely be more relatable content. Number 19. Hustlers simply is not some gender-based Bill Cosby switcheroo where we cheer for men being drugged by strippers because they helped bring the U.S. economy to a recession back in 2008. This is not some deranged film, but actually a very tame look into the life of sex workers and a look at people doing all they know to live the lifestyle they've been accustomed to. And of course, J-Lo deserves that Oscar nomination. Jennifer Lopez and Constance Wu are our tour guides into the world of strip clubs in New York City from 2007 to 2014, where things are intense, but in a clean Hollywood way to not give young girls nightmares. Constance Wu's character, Destiny, recounts her experience, primarily with Jennifer Lopez's character, Ramona, to a reporter named Elizabeth in order to get her charges minimized or dropped, and it is certainly a very colorful experience she has led. It is important to understand that this movie does not condone or justify their actions. It merely shows what does happen, and to see that it is someone's experience helps us at least not demonize the person, so grandstanding this film is preposterous. It's solid popcorn and worth a watch. Number 18. If you're looking for the Israeli version of Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless, then look no further than Cinnamons, an interesting comedy of manners that looks at an Israeli immigrant in France trying to fit in. The film seems to suggest that Israelis are too intense, too pugnacious to fit into the elegance and sophisticated Parisian society, but it is not exactly the most depressing thing either. It's more something to mock more than anything. I'm comparing the film to Breathless because that film plays with what is accepted within the form of traditional narrative cinema, and this film plays with what is acceptable to say about people from the Jewish state. It is also an entertaining romp through the streets of Paris, and is a movie that consists entirely of people outside or in rooms talking, but in an offbeat way that is charged with love and humor. It is also important that this movie is produced by Israelis, so they can take control of their image to an extent internationally, with the idea that Israelis are intense guys constantly fighting for their existence. This plays with the notion a bit with a fish out of water scenario, allowing us to laugh with them instead of putting them in a box, making it humanist and important cinema. Number 17. Jewish mysticism in a Hasidic New York neighborhood is the focus of The Vigil, a new film that has been coined The Jewish Exorcist, which is interesting because Judaism does not believe in a hell. The lack of an evil omnipotence leads to dark entities as a focus. They can still do harm, but they are not omnipotent like Satan in Christianity, but they are also older and have more history, so they can be very, very harsh to deal with. Oman is the country that has the most ghost stories, many that predate Judaism, and in fact, a spirit in The Exorcist is believed to predate Christianity. Yet, when we think possession movies, we think of priests performing exorcisms. This isn't really our fault, but it is cool to see this movie, which has plenty of freaky tension and release. Despite being a little hammy at points or forced, it is still a solid possession movie full of angst and catharsis. This may not be the cream of the crop when it comes to Midnight Madness movies, but the Jewish angle on the Exorcist movie subgenre is cool. And one thing that can be said for certain, which is that it is better than the blaxploitation Exorcist movie called Abby. Number 16. The producers who came out with Mandy have returned with Nicolas Cage, this time a H.P. Lovecraft adaptation, and the director is Richard Stanley. And he came up with a very solid follow-up to last year's effort. The team know how to play well to Nicolas Cage. They harness his absurd outbreaks for humorous and sometimes freaky results in this alien invasion movie, which is not as good as Mandy, but is a perfectly solid follow-up. To see Nicolas Cage crack awful dad jokes with his rural side upper-class family is pretty hilarious, because we know as an audience that this cannot last, and while it goes on for a while, it certainly does not last. When things get weird, they become nonsensical, which is perfectly fine for this kind of cinema, which is psychedelic in imagery, void of logic, and full of humor, in a take-it-or-leave-it manner. This was a blast to cover on the red carpet, and Mr. Cage is full of intensity. In 2017, he apparently came to Midnight Madness hammered with two women by his side, which is not a doubtable scenario. Number 15. Takashi Miike has been fizzling out for a bit, but if you're interested in his work still, his latest film that was a darling of the Cannes Film Festival played and was properly responded to during Midnight Madness at the Toronto International Film Festival. The Man with the Dead Eyes is still the most fun guy around in the festival circuit, with his slightly tame yet still worthy film First Love, which has characteristically funny use of violence and is saturated with zany Japanese markets. He still stands out. The Japanese market is lucky to still have Takashi Miike, and while he may not have a film as important as Rashomon, does that really matter to anyone? This movie tells another slightly convoluted tale of gangs, a lone boxer, and a woman who get unfortunately caught up in things despite their wishes. But the plot doesn't really matter. It's the humor and the violence that are done well. This is a good movie for the uninitiated, given its relative tameness, and it'll be enjoyable for the hardcore as well, since Takashi Miike has not made a movie like this in a long time. It is reminiscent of Graveyard of Honor or Ichi the Killer for a new generation. The man can make a sandwich and it'll still be interesting. Number 14. The subject of illegal immigrants being deported after doing military service in America is what this upcoming Showtime documentary looks at in a humane way, although it is truly horrifying. It seems like something everyone can agree upon is that if you serve your country by risking your life for a foreign war, that you should be then granted citizenship. And many of these guys thought that happened as soon as they were sworn into the military. Some of these deported veterans then train cartels to kill. So if you're American, do you really want your veterans working for the cartels? That is exactly what is happening, so be careful with a purity test for immigration. This is strong and never relentlessly depressing material. It is both an isolated case for thousands of men who face this scenario, and also more broadly looking at humanizing illegal immigrants in America right now, which sorely needs to be done. Showtime makes fantastic documentaries, and this one meets their level of quality. So if documentaries are already your thing, you'll certainly like this one. But if you aren't, you should ask yourself why and start watching them. Number 13. The Israeli and Palestinian conflict is very unsettling, and it is the political environment in 1990s Israel that is examined when Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin tried negotiating a peace settlement with Bill Clinton and Yasser Arafat. Yemeni Jew Yigal Amir is the focus of this film, as he navigates us through the right-wing death-obsessed frenzy of this period to, in the end, murder Rabin in the streets after a political event. This true story is so harsh and unsettling, as it looks at how rabbis and Likud political figures turned an eye to the Yigal Amirs of the country and cautiously encouraged there to be this hostility towards any peace movement. It also marks a certain turning point which Israeli democracy has not turned away from, which is the abandonment of any serious peace negotiation in favor of maintaining Jewish security by disproportionate means. The film is at times alarming and unsettling, but it also comes off as a docudrama, seeming authentic and accurate, despite that being unnerving, especially for those unfamiliar with the region. Incitement is a serious drama that is required viewing for anyone interested in the region or wanting to become more familiar with the cast of characters of this period, which was not so long ago. Number 12. The movie Giant baffled people in the audience I saw it with, but that is because it is trying to baffle, provoke, and give a sensual impression of making sense of the senseless, so while ambiguousness is something that can scare away viewers, the sensual cinematic elements of this film should put that to rest. While narrative coherence is viewed as integral to cinematic storytelling, that is not always the case, and this is a strong example of a more subjective kind of experience working in a film that relies more on formal elements than narrative ones. It looks at a final high school summer in the South and bad relationships that can't be put to bed, in some truly gripping scenes of sexual chemistry and the fear of sexual violence constantly lurking in the background, then eventually the foreground. The use of colors and local casting really enhances this vibe-centric film, which takes its time with setting tone and setting before going into subconscious cinema, establishing David Raboy as a talent to watch for in the future. It is a film that is meditative and unclear, but which has strong performances, direction, and colors, making it the kind of challenging art fare that at times is difficult to watch but digests in your system like a great meal. Number 11, Once Were Brothers. Robbie Robertson and the Band was the opening night film of the festival and had Martin Scorsese introduce the picture, since Robbie Robertson has been a music supervisor on his films for a very long time, which was apparently a wonderful moment. But keep in mind, the director, Daniel Roher, is 26 years old, and at his age, has had one of the greatest directors of all time introduce his film with TIFF, and while a documentary is typically thought to be of as dull, this one certainly cannot be called that. It is filled with emotional energy. It is hard not to feel excited when it wants you to feel that way, or feel impressed by the intelligence, ambition, or to feel raw when things get sad. The rise and fall of the band, in this case, the band, is the universal story of virtually every band. However, it is the storytelling and use of cinematic medium with great editing, great stories, and great music. At first I thought this was a soft entry for opening night film, or that it was something outdated, but it is more eternal and an utterly great Canadian story that more of us should be aware and proud of. Number 10. There are some very strong images involving animals early on in Blood Quantum, a telefilm movie that does not really disappoint, which may sound harsh, but it is a surprise given that not much of anything is associated with telefilm. Animal zombies are not usually seen in zombie movies, but the first scene with the fish still flapping around despite its guts being out has an indigenous mystical quality that was very strong. That was a very strong way to start this film. The concept seen in the film that indigenous people are immune to zombie bites is quite good, and it is the best 45 minutes in which this setup before the zombie apocalypse happens is the strongest part of the film. Okay, despite the novel concept, the film lacks some momentum for the half hour that follows. It becomes overly focused on exposition while showing off some good effects with zombie violence and interesting sets. The score is reminiscent of Goblin's work for George Romero's Dawn of the Dead, and the film is a worthy comparison to Romero's zombie trilogy because it is actually conceptually saying something about society. While the film isn't a masterpiece, it is a very strong reflection, and it is also a better expression of being indigenous in this era, going beyond a typical grievance narrative drama like Indian Horse, which is still strong, but not Blood Quantum strong. Number 9. The Nigerian movie The Lost Okoroshi is simply incredible. The ancient spirit Okoroshi and his posse do a trippy dance, then Okoroshi chases a security guard in a recurring dream until the security guard's shaman friend in the conscious world tells him to embrace the spirit. When he does that, the mystic and material worlds collide in a movie that is both trippy, funny, timeless, and entertaining. When the security guard wakes up, he is the Okoroshi spirit, wearing a traditional mask and full of purple flare, and since most of the movie being blind justice, rewarding the good and punishing the evil, of course. The spirit's wife, colleague, and boss are all very confused, but plenty of new characters are introduced, including a group of people who know about the spirit realm, a young child, a professor, and prostitutes. The film runs at an hour and a half, but the film is so entertaining in its humorous and surreal nature. The time will fly. It has a never check your watch guarantee. The issue it presents seems to be one Martin Heidegger brought up, which is that urban life can disconnect and overwhelm us from things that matter. Number 8. People with cerebral palsy are worthy of good stories. And that is exactly what happens in 37 seconds. The tale of a wheelchair-ridden 23-year-old woman who fantasizes about being a published manga writer. She does draw and write for the public, but her much prettier cousin is the one who takes all the credit as the face of the operation. But wheelchair-based Yuma still wants other work to be published under her own name. Yuma's sci-fi hentai manga does have appeal for one publisher, but one weakness is identified. The sex isn't convincing because it is quite obvious that Yuma is a virgin and hasn't even ever been intimate with someone. The sex is certainly integral to a sci-fi hentai. For those uninitiated, hentai is Japanese cartoon porn. So the publisher issues Yuma a challenge. Lose the V card to get more authentic words, then get published. Yuma's sexual odyssey brings her to a bunch of downtown sex workers where life isn't bleak, it's actually marvelous, and everyone is accepted for themselves, making Yuma's liberation inevitable. People with cerebral palsy are of worth, even if they aren't aware of it. And this movie is a beautiful celebration of that. Number 7. Simi-san is a really neat documentary which looks at the community called Bhutan in the Himalayas, which up until the past 12 years has not had any internet or television, which makes one wonder, is that good or bad? You may immediately think it's good for them to connect with everyone else. However, high up in the mountains in this Buddhist community, the effect has actually been quite negative since there is no context technological abuse has occurred. Here in the West, we are surrounded by stimulation all the time, and while we can certainly spend too much time on our devices, they are really being hurt by it in Bhutan, and we see it specifically from the eyes of Pinyanki, a 17-year-old teen. His life is being ruined off of this change in lifestyle, but the documentary is not particularly gloomy. It just tells the story with beautiful scenery, it's well shot, and a pleasure to watch, while simultaneously raising awareness of something dark. The Himalayas is rarely seen in movies, however. That should probably not be the case, given its beauty in movies like Black Narcissus, but this reminds us that they face a host of issues that most of us are probably not aware of, making this an interesting viewing experience. Number 6. Life for a couple of women after World War II in Russia is the focus of the movie Beanpole. That, at its best, is culturally insightful with its specific nature, but at its worst can be grief porn a la Manchester by the Sea. Russia is an intense place, but World War II movies typically look at the men. But this movie focuses, interestingly, on 2 women who have plenty of post-traumatic stress to deal with after dealing with history's most deadly war. The slice-of-life authenticity is interesting in the film, but it could, frankly, use a bit more levity in a dark way like Francis Ford Coppola did in Apocalypse Now, or Martin Scorsese did in Taxi Driver. That issue should be addressed, but still not disqualify this movie for you, which has lots of great production design, and shows how it was during this period for 2 more vulnerable individuals coming from the Caucasus in a major Russian city. Director Kantemir Balakov should be commended for accomplishing what he has, and he's a man to follow in the future, so please do keep an eye out for him. Number 5. British reporter Robert Fisk has been covering the Middle East tragedy from the region since the late 70s, which gives him a real street cred to be trusted to get this story right versus journalists living elsewhere. He is the focus of the documentary. This is not a movie, and while it was certainly not a movie, it was a movie that led him to live his life. When he was 12, he watched Alfred Hitchcock's Foreign Correspondent, and then decided that was the life he wanted. Far from the glitzy glam of this movie, in the end, Robert Fisk now has found that no matter how hard he works, the Middle East has remained in flames from the time he started in the region to now. The reasons are complex, but Fisk's takeaways are more solid than from the journalists who question his credibility so comfortably from their groupthink mindsets that kick in for the desire for a career in a major city. Robert Fisk is a great choice for the subject of a documentary, as he has displayed intelligence, integrity, and strong analysis. So while he doesn't have the sex appeal of some other documentary subjects, his virtues are ones that we should all aspire to have. Number 4. The Platform Is So Trippy and so good and so cool. It looks at a Dante-esque prison where 2 prisoners are assigned not a room but a level of a dystopic hellhole where food comes down to them every day on the platform, and the number assigned to the prisoners determines how much food will come down. The prisoners randomly materialize at different levels at various points determined by their observed behavior. So things are likely to get dicey at a certain point, and you'll probably either kill or get killed by your prisoner partner. The dialogue and performances are trippy to match the trippy concept of the film. They speak with a certain rhythm and diction that is suited well to the Spanish language because it relishes in the melodramatic. The dystopia of it all is very effectively done. It is consistently dark, but never too much to handle, especially with the bizarre characters and scenes, and makes the whole environment of it livable as an observer. The final scene doesn't make the whole experience any clearer or brighter, but it does seem to have a positive message, and this film can't be pigeonholed as some unpleasant experience, and everything leading up to it is certainly entertaining in a sense. That sense being conceptual, cathartic, and a keen display of dark wits on every level of filmmaking. Number 3. Wakaliwood invaded TIFF with Crazy World as the closing film for Midnight Madness, which is a very solid way to cap things off. The film looks at the phenomena of children being kidnapped to be soldiers, but in this case they are captured by a bad guy who wears a suit but looks more adolescent than adults, and he seems to be capturing them for fun. This kind of scenario, which is nihilistic humor, is typical of Wakaliwood, which makes sense of the slums of Uganda through high-pitched action comedies to make the experience somewhat accessible for the rest of us. Or at least really funny, which this movie is. If you haven't yet done so, make sure you watch Who Killed Captain Alex on YouTube. Then you know exactly what you're getting into when this film eventually comes to town. Alan Hoffmanis gives the industry another number to be taken more seriously, but the fact is, this movie had no budget. That is frightening. And the fact is, the closing Midnight Madness movie from Africa should make you want to step your game up. VJ Emmy must also deserve props for this movie, and all his work, his hilarious remarks through Wakaliwood movies, make them lots of fun in an obnoxious kind of way. Number 2. The Safdie brothers are geniuses at casting their leads, because when you hear the names Robert Pattinson and Adam Sandler, your emotional response is not likely gritty criminal masterminds. By getting a big actor, but still using their name to undersell the material can truly be seen for what it is, which is excellent criminal drama that does not have non-stop violence, but does have non-stop tension. Adam Sandler plays a jeweler in the New York Diamond District, and he constantly has some drama that he's not on top of, or if he does find resolution, it is so temporary, by the end, we realize that nothing is supposed to be held together. The chaos is slick, with an almost science fiction-based soundtrack, which giving it a cool-as-hell spacey tone that makes you amused, gripped, and involved in the entire 2-hour duration, even more so than the Safdie's previous film, Good Time. Those uncut gems have a certain power over whoever holds them, and like the myth of those who hold on to the spear that killed Christ, any omnipotent power can only be held temporarily, till the holder blows up into pieces. By the end of Uncut Gems, we all explode to bits. Parasite won the Palme d'Or of the Cannes Film Festival earlier this year, and was the second runner-up for the Grolsch People's Choice Award at TIFF. It looks like it will be South Korea's first Oscar nomination for the Best Picture at the Oscars. All these accolades should be listed off to build up some hype. It is deserved, and in this case, it certainly does. It is certainly my selection for the best film at TIFF 2019. But why, you say? Well, it is both inventive, trippy, funny, and dark. It explores class, it has strange dialogue, and excellent performances. So instead of explaining the plot, which has a dark revelation halfway through, and a description of which becomes spoilery, I just want to say how it feels to watch instead of what you're watching. It is almost intimidating to try to describe, because you worry about letting the film down by not doing justice to its creativity. Yes, it is that good, and it will be a cinematic crime if it does not win Best Foreign Film at the Oscars. Bong Joon-ho is no stranger to success, having been one of the few South Korean directors to direct A-list Hollywood talents like Chris Evans in Snowpiercer and Jake Gyllenhaal in Okja. But now he's in a position where he's turning down major Hollywood projects. Instead of being courted, he is following the path of Quentin Tarantino, in his own words, with a passion for originality in future projects, making it, whatever he does next, a major offense. Can a movie like Parasite even be topped?